Okay, I have a mic that works now. Welcome to the 14th annual CWAG Candidate Forum. I'm Gary Beverly, the president of the Citizens Water Advocacy Group. We are a local nonprofit corporation established in 2002 and run by volunteers and the board. And I'd like to introduce you to the board. Could the board members please stand up and raise your hand? We got Leslie Hoy back over here, and Marlene Luckman, our treasurer, Fred Oswald, LD1 is our treasurer, secretary. Ed Wolf is chair of the education committee. Mike Lane is kind of co-chair of the science committee. Who else? Did I miss anyone? So if you have questions or comments about the forum, please feel free to chat with these people after the meeting. Our vision is that all residents of the Upper Verde River Basin and the Prescott Active Management Area have a sustainable supply of clean water. Flows in the springs and streams, especially that the Verde River, are maintained, and that the biodiversity of plant and animal communities is preserved. We welcome the interest and support of citizens, and especially new members. There's a lot of information back at the literature table, and you can sign up to join CWAG and to support our effort. Now, CWAG is nonpartisan. That is, we're not Republican or Democrat or Green. But all water issues are political issues that have political solutions. The forum's purpose is to insert water issues into our political and electoral dialogue and to educate both voters and candidates about these water issues. 7 candidates for the Arizona legislature representing both political parties will respond to a series of questions from both CWAG and the audience. CWAG's questions are posted at our website, which is cwagaz.org. The questions focus on local water issues that the Arizona legislature needs to address. All the candidates receive the questions in advance. CWAG experts have met with some candidates upon their request to discuss the questions. The audience can submit written questions. These should be limited to local water concerns. You received a white question card when you came in, so you can write your question down and then pass it to the outside aisles, where we have 2 people that will collect those questions. Art Manberg back here on this side, and Fred Oswald will be on that side. And then board members Mike Lane and Ed Wolf will organize the questions and select which ones are offered to the candidates. Because there isn't enough time to answer all your questions in the forum, CWAG will publish our answers to all these questions on our website. Our September 8 program will also be devoted to answering your water questions. Before we meet the candidates, let's first all recognize the considerable personal commitment required to run for office and to serve Legislative District 1 and the legislature. So thanks to you all. So we'll begin with a 2-minute introduction by each candidate. We have a timekeeper to keep us on schedule. Next, we'll proceed to the prepared questions and then to the audience questions. And then finally, each candidate will present a 1-minute closing statement. This program will end at noon, and then the candidates will be available for further conversations at their tables in the back of the room. So, candidates, when you wish to speak, hold up your water drop sign, and Jan is demonstrating that right now. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes or less, and remember that the best answers are simple and brief. You're not required to take the full 2 minutes. You're encouraged to comment on other candidates' responses. Just raise your water drop sign. We would ideally like a discussion and not some kind of a linear go down the line, this is what I think kind of a thing. So if that's possible, it's acceptable to react to other people's statements. And then to the audience, I want to say that the restrooms are through the double doors in Davis Hall to the right. And then the other thing is silence your cell phones, right? Please do that now. And then finally, I would ask you to please refrain from shouting, cheering, applause, or weeping during this discussion. And then the last suggestion I have for you is that you need to vote. Everybody should go out and vote at the right time. So, let's begin with the candidate introductions, and let me just start. Let's start on the left with Noel Campbell.
God, it's great to see you guys. You know, this is my 5th time here. That's over a 10-year period, and then I attended when I wasn't between running. So I have a long history with CWAG. The leadership knows me pretty well. I've had the honor and privilege to serve as the last 4 years as your state representative for the district, and I've really enjoyed doing it. I consider myself pretty independent. I don't really kowtow to anybody. Nobody's got me in their back pocket, and that's just how I am. And anybody knows me knows that. I am looking forward to serving and dealing with these water issues. We have really basic concerns that we need to deal with. And I'll tell you right off the bat, I consider myself a conservationist in the Teddy Roosevelt mode, who was a Republican, by the way. And I believe in science-based data. And so that's my general premise. We'll hear a lot of talk, we'll hear a lot of issues, but the science doesn't lie, I don't believe. And when that comes in to play, then that's where I look at it really in depth. My background is I'm from Arizona. I graduated from Arizona State in 1965. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was a pilot in the Navy. I flew in combat there. I came back. I worked on the U.S. border for 27 years with the U.S. Customs Service. I learned to speak Spanish as a student in Mexico. And I served in Mexico, Central America, South America. Had some really interesting things to work on. At age 57, mandatory retirement. And then I fought fires for 10 years, so I learned a lot about fire propagation, how we handle our natural resources in that area. And now I'm into politics. And for those that don't know, the first 2 times I ran, I lost. Karen Fan beat the pants off of me. And the 3rd time I ran, the voters felt sorry for me and they elected me. And I hope you feel sorry for me again and vote me in. I appreciate that.
Okay, next, Jody.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to see you. I'm Jody Rooney, and I'm running for the House of Representatives here in Arizona. I'm an alumna of Augustana College with a biology degree. I have served as a transportation professional in various levels of leadership at the Department of Transportation. Transportation is my career, but education is my passion. I have served here at the Central Yavapai Metropolitan Planning Organization. I've seen some of your faces there as well, and I'm grateful that people engage. Thank you very much. My career gave me the opportunity because I took initiative and I'm a go-getter. I've had more than one boss say, Jody, you get things done. And maybe that's why they handed me all those projects and programs, but I ran statewide programs here for our citizens, for our cities, counties, towns, and tribes to get transportation projects. I know how the money works, how the rhythm works. I know where to go to make sure the money doesn't walk away as well. Certainly, I've served in the ranks as a citizen. I currently serve as a councilwoman, and I have those relationships in place at the state level. As a Flynn Brown Fellow, they have prepared me for state-level leadership. After years of government experience and working and volunteering as a citizen, I believe the time is right to invest my qualifications toward a stronger, safer, more robust Arizona. Water is one of those issues that we all care about. I can tell you as well, I'm a daughter of the American Revolution, and I care about our nation. My family fought for our nation, for our Constitution. My grandfather fought and died at the Battle of the Bulge, serving. I fight too, and I will fight for your rights. And I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And I believe we have the right to keep and bear arms. Thank you.
Okay, great. Next, Jan Manolis.
Oh, it's live, and I don't have to stand up and sit down and go ahead and talk to you if you had seen me in the educational forum. Hi, my name is Jan Manolis, and I'm running for the Arizona House in Legislative District 1. Thanks so much for all of you as concerned citizens for coming this morning, and thank you CWAG for hosting this event. I feel it's very important. Just a little bit about me is I was born and raised in Southern California, but spent many of my childhood summers in Prescott, or in Flagstaff. My extensive and successful career in information technology reflects a long road to senior IT management and leadership roles, many of them with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And I also served as an adjunct professor for the University of Laverne. I have dual masters in information technology and in business administration. I moved to Prescott in 2014 when my husband was diagnosed with dementia. With issues relating to his care in Prescott, and then also with some of the events happening in our world today, led me to the decision to go ahead and run for office. I don't feel that there is anything more essential to life on this planet than water. Like almost everyone in this room, I am a student of water, and I'm continually learning. It has been such an eye-opener for some of the issues of water, and I will always know that there is more for me to learn. Terms like assured water supply, I can't even say it, hydrologic sustainability, and safe yield are becoming part of our discussion when previously we really didn't know what those terms meant. But like those in other communities, we are all fair, reasonable, and intelligent and caring citizens who badly want to work together across party lines to find solutions for everyone, for our children and for our grandchildren. I wish to be your representative for the House. I'm deeply committed to working with scientists, engineers, and community leaders to construct a feasible and good water plan for our region. Thank you.
Next, Ed Gogek.
Working? This one works. Yeah, my name's Ed Gogek. I'm a doctor. I'm a psychiatrist who's been in Prescott. I came here in 1991, actually back when Prescott was a physician shortage area, which it certainly isn't today. And one of the things that I do is I work with drug addicts, and it really has quite an application to the water issue, because when we look at solutions, a lot of the addict patients, drug addicts are like the world's best short-term thinkers. They want the quick fix right away. What's going to help me today? Forget about how bad it is for tomorrow. And a lot of the solutions that we look at for our water shortage are quick fixes for a long-term problem that will, in the long run, make things worse. And our job is to really look more at the long-term solutions that'll really work well. My own history is I actually have an undergraduate degree in engineering. 40 years ago I graduated as a hydrosystems engineer, but I remember almost nothing about it. What I do remember is that what we learned was a lot of high technology stuff. We did not learn a whole lot of conservation. And it's another problem we have, that a lot of the solutions being offered are going to be big tech, and I'm pretty concerned about that because we're talking about things that will really boost the cost of water. And we have a society that does not take care of its poorer members. And I really don't want to see a society where water is expensive and it's not necessarily a human right, which is happening in other parts of the world. I do not want to see that happen here. Other part of my history is an environmentalist. I was actually very involved in the anti-nuclear power movement back in the 70s. And of course, the flip side of that movement was pro-solar and wind, so I've been talking about that since then. So I think the water issues are really important, and especially what sort of solutions we have. So I'm not going to look for short-term fixes. I'm not going to look for high-tech fixes. I'm looking for things that are low-tech that'll work long-term.
Thank you, Ed. David Stringer, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. I hope, this mic is live. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here for those of you who don't know me, my name is David Stringer, and for the past 2 years, it's been my honor to be one of your 2 representatives in the state legislature, along with my seatmate, Noel Campbell. I'd like to thank CWAG for hosting this event. This is my second CWAG candidate forum. I was here 2 years ago, and I'm honored to be back to discuss water issues, which are so vital to Arizona and to our community. This particular candidate forum, I will say, is one of the best among the many that I'm invited to. The folks who attend the CWAG event are among the best informed voters that I get a chance to talk to. In the interest of full disclosure, since the last candidate forum, I have been back to a few CWAG meetings, and I've been so impressed with the leadership and the membership that I've actually joined CWAG. So I'm here not just as a candidate this morning, but also as a member of the organization. It's a cliche, but water is life. Without water, nothing lives. We live in a desert, so water issues are a matter of compelling interest to all of us. By way of background, like many of you, I'm an Arizonan by choice. My family moved to Arizona some years ago, and I joined them in 2010 when I retired. My professional training is in law and public accountancy. I've also been a small businessman most of my career, most recently in the hospitality industry as a hotel owner in Prescott. Although most of my career has been spent elsewhere, I was actually born in Anchorage, Alaska. I grew up back in the 1950s and 60s when Anchorage was not much bigger than Prescott is today. So Alaska was largely pristine when I grew up. I grew up with a deep respect for nature and for the environment. I understand the issues of preserving our scenic beauty and our natural assets. Like most western states, Arizona has great natural beauty that must be protected and preserved for future generations. Having said that, I am a water optimist. The arid climate we live in and the long drought we are enduring creates challenges, but we also have assets and opportunities. It's a fact that with a population of 7 million, Arizona uses less water today than it did 50 years ago. In the Prescott area, we are supplying a much larger population with the same level of water usage that we had decades ago. So the current drought and declining water table, am I out of time? Thank you, and I'll pass the mic.
Next, Joe Craycraft, please.
Hello. I'm grateful to get a chance to explore and talk about water. My name is Joe Craycraft, and I'm the Democratic candidate for Arizona State Senate in our legislative district. I'm a retired FBI agent and an accountant. I worked for 2 police departments as a cop before I went to law school. I graduated from Santa Clara University Law School with honors, and I passed the California bar, first time. I thought I was retired, but I'm back investigating what is going on in our state. And what I found is there's a lot of things that need to change. One of them is the water laws in Arizona. We have to protect our precious, life-sustaining water in Arizona. I'm running for office to make these changes through strong and effective leadership. The time to make needed changes is now. Thank you.
And finally, last but not the least, Karen Fan, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Gary. If I don't sneeze again, I'm sorry. Something here is making me sneeze. For most of you, many of you know me. I've been here forever. We moved here when I was 4 years old. I grew up here in Prescott, went to our local schools here. Many of you I've known from when I was a vice mayor and council person on the city of Prescott back in the 90s. And then you also know me as the mayor of Chino Valley for 3 terms out there. I've also served 6 years over in the House, and then these last 2 years I have been over in the Senate. I took Senator Steve Pierce's spot over there. When I was in the Senate House, I was chair of transportation, chair of insurance, the Ag and Water Committee, and the Municipal Government Committee. Over in the Senate now, I am now on appropriations, vice chair of transportation, Senate vice chair of finance, and of course natural resources. Many of you know that I've been working with water for over 25 years in this area. And as a matter of fact, Ground with CWAG was actually formed, and I think Gary had not gray hair at the time, right? Yeah, but you keep your hat on now, Gary. So consequently, we formed the Verde River Basin Partnership. We formed the Upper Verde River Watershed Protection Coalition. I was the first chairman of that. And I served on the Yavapai County Water Advisory Committee. I was the chair of the CYMPO, dealing with transit issues around here, 8 years on NACOG. It goes on and on. When in the past years, and I've been down in the Senate, I have sponsored and passed legislation dealing with macro water harvesting. Always a great topic to talk about. Water desalination plants and facilities, and the reduction of water usage and salt for our water softeners. Huge problem down there in the Phoenix area with water softeners. And the legislation we did actually will be saving 4,000 gallons of water and 700 pounds of salt every year for every unit down there. I thought that was a pretty good accomplishment. So thank you all. I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, well, let's proceed then with the questions. The first question is, basically to describe our water problem. Legislative District 1 includes the Prescott Active Management Area, the Big Chino Valley, and the Verde River. What do you consider to be LD1's key water resource issues? So whoever wants to go first, raise your water drop. Jody, great. 2 minutes, please.
Gary, I'll try to be brief. We need to manage our Big Chino water supplies. We need to reach safe yield in the AMA and protect the Verde River.
Okay, great. Noel.
That's the biggest non-answer you're going to hear here. So general, let's get specific. We need to maintain our water resources. We need to not deplete them, and we might have to make sure there's enough water to go around. So when you talk about the Big Chino and the pipeline, you have to be specific about what you're talking about. And you have to have an understanding that these water resources are finite. And that's why we have modeling studies out there between SRP and the city of Prescott to determine what's actually happening with the Big Chino aquifer. And so, we know that we're losing groundwater out in Paulden area. The wells are getting deeper and deeper. And we have to come to some kind of resolution about how we're going to conserve our water. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But I think the science is where it really is most important here. When we get these modeling studies done, then we'll have a better understanding of what's actually happening with our water resources.
Mr. Stringer.
Thank you. I identified...
you try the mic.
Sure. In thinking about this question, I identified three basic areas that I think define our most compelling water issues here. The first is reaching sustainable yield. The second is protecting the Verde River and the associated ecosystem. And the third is encouraging common sense conservation measures. I want to speak for a moment about the Verde Valley, the Verde River. Protecting the Verde River is an absolute priority. I will say, though, I have never met anyone who didn't understand the value of the Verde River ecosystem, both for its natural beauty and for its economic value to the region. There are vested economic interests that will ensure its protection. The Salt River Project, I believe, has priority claim on the Verde River water. They obviously are going to be looking out for their investment. Agricultural interests in the Verde River Valley depend on the Verde River. They also are going to be looking out for the Verde River and for the ecosystem. There is an agreement in place between Prescott and Prescott Valley in the Salt River Project that ensures that whatever development may happen in the future with the Big Chino will not impact the Verde River. Thank you.
Jan.
Well, when you look at this question, it is really a simple answer, but not really. And basically, we're taking out more water than it's putting back into the Big Chino aquifer. And what the consequence is that we're overdrafting. And what happens is our water table is going to drop, wells are going to go dry, pumping and drilling is going to have to go deeper and deeper to be able to bring water up, which leads to more expense. We also have the problem of reduced stream flows, which is actually the groundwater from the Big Chino that is flowing into the existing Verde River. And this will be impacting, causing harm to the ecosystems around the Verde, and then also for the water that does go down into the Phoenix area, which is about 40%. And lastly, we have the problem of potential land subsidence. And basically what happens is when the water goes away, the land kind of collapses and so forth, and it doesn't matter how much water you try to pump back in. If the space isn't there for the water, you aren't able to go ahead and, well, water's not going to come back in. Saltwater Project, in conjunction with Prescott Valley and the City of Prescott, are in a study to determine the impact of pumping from the Big Chino to the Upper Verde River. But prior reports already say that proposed pumping has a negative effect. So we need to determine whether it's appropriate to offset pumping, or whether we should look for a pipeline, or maybe we should just look at ideas for conserving water, for being able to harvest water, and to be able to go ahead and sustain our living as it is. Thank you. Well, and basically I forgot to say is we must reduce our demand. Thank you.
Mr. Gogek, please.
Say the problem is that we're completely dependent on our local groundwater, and we are depleting it faster than we're replacing it. So there's two issues, maybe three. There's the active management area that includes Prescott, Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, and some of Dewey Humboldt. And in there, we've got the Little Chino and the Upper Aguafria subbasins, which have been our aquifers for quite a while, and we are depleting them. So we're looking, and there's a recharge, but we're not recharging it anywhere near the rate that would actually bring us to safe yield where it will be sustainable forever, which is what we really need to do. We need a long-term solution on that. Outside of the AMA, in the Big Chino, which is not part of our active management area, there's just no protection for groundwater. And so, and a lot of people want to put their straws into that aquifer. I mean, it's not just Prescott and Prescott Valley. It's also this company that wants to use it as an energy project. There are agribusinesses in California that have been buying up land in the other counties of Arizona and sucking the water out, lowering the water table. People's wells go dry. Saudi Arabia has been coming to Arizona, and we have no protections. And that is the big problem. We are not protecting our water supply. So the big issue is, the big challenge inside the active management area is coming to a sustainable use of our limited water supply that will last as long as people live here. The challenge outside in the Big Chino Valley is protecting the Big Chino Valley groundwater from all these forces that want to deplete it. And I would say there the problem is we don't have the laws to protect the Big Chino. So I'll disagree. I think even if SRP and Prescott Valley want the Verde River to be maintained the way it is, we don't have the laws to act on that and to protect it. And so we need different laws. We need to, our groundwater law has to be changed.
Okay, the two ladies on the end. Karen, you want to go first? Okay.
I was just going to wrap it up, but we'll... okay, the question, what are our key water resource issues? There are three major issues here. One has been mentioned already, which is the safe yield. As you know, back in the 80s, we formed our groundwater water laws. They are some of the strictest in the entire nation. That's how we formed our 5 AMAs. That's how we created our assured water supply credits. And a lot of that here in the Little Chino Aquifer in the LD1 area, as well as the other AMAs, is to create self-yield. That means that we are not overdrafting our water. One of the biggest problems is that we were supposed to be in safe yield by 2025. Doesn't look like we're going to get there, and there was really nothing in the law that really has any severe enough penalties that makes us get that way. So while we are very, very aware of the issue that's going on, we're not making as much progress as we should have been to reach that safe yield by 2025. The second is we have a bifurcated system here. We have surface waters and we have groundwater. Surface water is first in right, first in time. SRP has a lot of control over all of our surface water in LD1. And then, of course, the groundwater actually belongs and is controlled by the state of Arizona. Just because it's under your property doesn't mean you necessarily own it. You only have a right to it. So in that service, we have to make sure that we can do better with our surface and our groundwater sustainability, because those two definitely need to be more intermingled. Third but not last is the exempt domestic wells. While we want to protect our wells or we protect our well usage, we also have to be very smart and have to be very understanding that we can't waste this precious water. And so we do have to look and come up with a nice regional agreement or something that basically says we're going to work closer together to make sure that we do not waste the water with the exempt domestic wells. Thank you.
Okay, and Joe, you can wrap up this question.
Okay, the question is, what are our problems, water problems? Our primary water problem is the widespread decline of groundwater levels. We are pumping too much water from our groundwater supply. More groundwater is pumped than is being recharged. We have not been in safe yield since the 1980s, and there is no plan for us to get into safe yield. Also a problem, we have inadequate water conservation, and another big problem is that our Verde River is threatened by removing groundwater from the Big Chino. Thank you.
Okay, any comments on that you want to add? We have a couple of minutes here. Amazingly, we're ahead of schedule. No, go ahead.
You know, I'm in agreement that we need to relook at these water laws, and but the problem is that we tried in the past to look at that and was never held in committee, and that's where you get into the committee chairmans. That's so important in the legislature. I won't speak about the Senate, but I will speak about the House. When you have people that control that chairmanship, you know, you're dealing with people that are looking at many different vested interest development, water usage, growth, and if that chairman doesn't seem inclined to want to hear about new water laws, it's not going to happen. So the pressure has to be directed to the chairman of natural resources. That's the most important committee. I wish I was on that committee. I'm not. It's a very, you know, they want to pick who they want on that committee. And I wish, I'm going to try to get on that committee this session if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected, because these water issues are paramount, especially up here. So that's where we need to look. It's one thing to say we need to revisit and make some laws, but really, you know, you have to understand how that system works down there.
Any other comments? Ed, you want to add something?
Yeah, and I agree with what Mr. Campbell said about the legislature has to act on this, and that's not the easiest thing to do. Part of it is that people have to be really, if the public is really, really concerned, what we've seen is elected officials will act on something. And we need to find some way to get people more concerned, realizing that we are possibly facing loss of our water supplies. Kingman right now, because of so much agribusiness coming in, is possibly going to lose its water supply. And that should be a lot bigger news. One of the problems with that is if we make a big fuss about this, it kind of scares business away from Arizona because they think of us as not having water. We don't want to do that. But then again, it is a real threat, and we want people to be really concerned about it. I think what's happening in Kingman and what's happening in southern Arizona, there's a big article in the New York Times about people losing their water, and at the same time, there's people in the legislature trying to weaken the water protection. So we need some way to get people more motivated on this.
Yes, Jan.
Well, I'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit what Mr. Campbell went ahead and started to say is that we didn't get any legislation out of committee to be able to vote and try to come up with a solution. Right now, the legislative house is extremely bipolar, and where did that come from? Well, you know, sometimes these words just slip out, but anyway. well, that might have taken the nerves away, is very bipartisan, and we need to go ahead and try to learn to work together. And I think one of the things that I did with my work with information technologies in software implementation is trying to get people that had disparate interests to be able to work together, to be able to come up with at least the old 80-20 rule of trying to meet the common solutions. So with that said, I feel that I would be very much an advocate and like to work on this committee also, but also to get people talking about what really can work to make sure that we can sustain our water. Thank you.
Okay, I think Jen gets a point for the Freudian statement that relaxes the room. and it's actually probably not such an inaccurate statement. Any other comments, please? Okay, let's move to the next question, which is about water for development. In the Prescott Active Management Area, we are pumping 5 billion gallons more than is recharged each year. Groundwater levels continue to decline, and some residential wells are going dry. Meanwhile, state water law continues to permit Arizona Department of Water Resources to issue 100-year assured water supply certificates. When citizens express concern about rapid population growth in the face of drought and our shrinking water supply, how do you respond? What ideas do you have for legislation to strengthen our water laws so that Arizonans really will have water for 100 years and beyond? Who wants to go first? Joe was up first.
In order to address citizens' concerns, information on the status of local water supplies must be openly available and explained to the public. The concerns are real. I respond by explaining that the purpose of water law is to guarantee we have water for the future and we preserve our groundwater. Our water laws need to be more water science-based. The Arizona Department of Water Resources, ADWR, has presented our groundwater problems and alternative solutions comprehensively and in numerous groundwater monitoring, management, and modeling reports. Change to water law must have their roots in science and must reflect long-term concerns. Whether a population requiring a water supply is existing or new development or no growth or fast growth, a groundwater balance in our aquifers must be achieved. If not, then the ultimate outcome is depletion. Our state laws need to be strengthened so we actually have water for at least 100 years. And I'm going to say one more thing. To say our legislature hasn't done anything is a fact. And to say it's because chair people cannot be convinced means we need stronger and more effective leadership. Thank you.
Okay, next comment. Jan, did you have your drop up? You did, that's okay. Go ahead, please.
Well, when I first read this question, I thought 100 years, how in the world can we predict what's going to happen in the next 100 years? We have the possible impact of climate change, we have the state of our economy, and we don't know what our population demand is going to be on water. So with that said, we need to fully understand the proposed development on our groundwater levels. But I'm going to be a little bit out there to say we should temporarily halt the issuance of 100-year assurance water certificates until we actually understand what hydrology, I can't say that word, and scientific studies say to fully understand all of the possible impacts of the relationship between groundwater and surface water. We need to adopt new legislation to strengthen water laws and regulatory framework to ensure the development of water resources, to pass legislation to pursue innovative solutions to address water conservation, and to provide appropriate water resources management. We need to promote education regarding water resource knowledge and promote informed use of water resource planning tools, and I think education is really critical in moving forward. We also need to be aggressive in water conservation, direct potable reuse of effluent or treated wastewater, stormwater runoff collection, and extensive rainwater harvesting. Thank you.
Okay, who can go next? Mr. Stringer.
Gary, thank you. Let me take a little bit of a different tact on this. 100 years is a long time, but to understand what can happen in 100 years, think about 100 years ago. We live in a very different world than we did 100 years ago, and 100 years from now we'll also be living in a very different world. Arizona's long-term water security, I believe, is assured. 100 years from now, water will be abundant. The problem is the short term and the intermediate term. The reason I say that water will be abundant 100 years from now is that the technology for desalination is here. Israel, with a population of 9 million people living in a desert, much like we do, gets all of its potable water from 5 desalination plants that run, I believe, on natural gas. San Diego gets 11% of its water from the Carlsbad desalination plant that produces 50 million gallons a day. That's more than a gallon of water per day for everybody in California and Arizona combined. So that's just one plant. California can build any number of plants up and down its coast. So the technology of desalination is here, it's working. The problem is the cost, very expensive, and the transportation, getting the water moved around to where it's actually needed. But I think in 100 years we will have solved those problems. Alternative fuels, the energy cost is am I done or do I have 30 seconds? Energy cost is the #1 issue in desalination, but we have solar and alternative energy sources coming on stream. So 30, 40, 50 years from now, we will be able to desalinate at reasonable cost. So the long-term water future for Arizona and other arid areas of the world really is assured. We just have to make that transition. We're losing about a foot a year in the Little Chino, but that aquifer is several hundred feet deep. So we do not have an immediate crisis, even though we're using more water than we're recharging. Thank you.
Next. Karen Fan.
Thank you. I'll take that one. Okay, so we're talking about the drought, and we're talking about growth. And obviously, we're not going to stop growth because we live in a wonderful state and we live in a wonderful district here, which is why so many people want to move here. So let's look at how we actually handle this and how do we handle the growth. First of all, we have to look at that 60% of all of our water use is outdoor water use. So this is why we need to do water conservation efforts where we do xeriscape landscaping, drought-resistant plants, and the macro water harvesting and micro water harvesting that I talked about in the opening. That we can be able to capture that water from not only storm water runoff, but off of your rooftops and things like that. When we have snow, which we don't get that often, but we get it up there in the Mingus Mountains and Flagstaff and all the other areas, and depending on where that water is running to, we should be able to capture that. We should be able to, we have so much clay in our soils right now, it literally creates like a barrier so that water, when it melts, that snow, it's not getting back into the aquifer, it's just evaporating. So we can do this much better by being able to import that. The second thing is the Chino Valley Development Recharge Program. We did not have a wastewater treatment plant out there, and so consequently, if you are on a septic, that's a lot of water. So we need to keep looking at expanding on our wastewater treatment plants throughout as growth occurs. Let me know when my time's up. 30 seconds. Hydroponics. This is another thing we can seriously look at. You know, the days of growing in open fields is long gone with the water usage that we have. If you go out to Yavapai College, visit with John Morgan, you'll see we are doing amazing stuff with hydroponics of where we are actually growing fruits and vegetables. And agriculture, we are growing it vertically instead of horizontally, and we are using recircling water instead of wasting it. So we need to look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Ed, please go on.
Okay, so 2 things about the 100-year requirement for any new construction within the active management area. One is that has to be taken really seriously. It can't just be rubber stamps, some sort of paperwork formality. We have to actually look at it and make sure that the 100 years really is going to be met. which isn't always happening. But the other thing is, 100 years is not that long, because if we had a 100-year requirement back when the state was founded in 1912, everything would be bone dry right now. So I think we should have sustainability, safe yield for as long as people might be living in Arizona. The other thing about safe yield is, as Karen Fan said, there's no teeth in the law. We need some way to actually enforce it. And one way, I think, would be saying, and anything, putting teeth in is going to be controversial, but no new development until there's safe yield. That would be kind of tough, but otherwise, we're going to run out of water. As far as, I really believe strongly in conservation. Las Vegas pays people to desert landscape. As was mentioned, half of Prescott's water, residential water, goes to watering lawns. We should be doing that. In Payson, they monitor leaks, and they're not doing it. They monitor people's water bills, water use, and it's not to see if you're flushing your toilet too often. It's to see if there's leaks, and it works pretty well. We need a tax break for rainwater harvesting, which Noel Campbell has worked on, and I hope if you're reelected that you work on it again, get it passed, because that's a really important thing. I want to just address this desalinization, which is a high-tech solution. Having worked in the anti-nuclear movement, I remember when they said it will be too cheap to meter, and it's not. Yes, Israel's using it. A lot of places are using it, but what they figure is if we use it here with pumping uphill, we're going to increase our water bills significantly, and we're going to reach a point where not everybody can afford water. Most people can, but not everyone can. And my question is, are we going to make it a human right that people can have water? If we are going to have a system that's that expensive. Because right now we've got a system where a lot of people are saying healthcare is not a right. People can go without healthcare if they can't afford it. We've got a minimum wage that doesn't allow a lot of people to rent a home, and they're saying, well, that's life. What is going to happen to people who can't afford water? And I would much rather see us use conservation, which will keep water affordable and available for everyone.
No, please, go ahead.
A couple of things. There are two water laws right now, and we need to revisit the Arizona Groundwater Management Act. And only that can happen if the governor calls for that. We need governor leadership. It's one thing for me as a representative to say something, or a Senator Fan, but without the governor being on board and pushing for this, nothing is really ever going to happen. How many times have you guys driven out to Yarnell, Peoples Valley, and they got those sprinklers going on in the heat of the day? For what reason? 75% of that water is evaporated before it even hits the ground. Why did they do that? I don't know. Because they can do it. And so it doesn't make any sense. Now the governor came up with some kind of a proposal to meter what water was being used outside of the AMA. And that met such horrendous opposition. Metering, it's like, God, it's like a terrorist word. I mean, but after talking to the Cattlemen's Association, they didn't like the idea of meters, but they didn't have any problem with maybe estimating by the use of electricity. Most pumps run on electricity, not all of them. But we need to know what kind of water usage we actually have out there. We don't, and you can't do anything about knowing what you have unless you understand it and somehow account for it. So I'm calling on Governor Ducey to show real leadership. And when he comes up here to talk, that's where you need to pound on him. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to remind the audience to withhold the weeping and cheering. Actually, there's not that much to weep about. These guys are pretty good. Huh? Jody, go ahead.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think the question was about expressing concern about growth, and I get this question every week as a councilwoman. So I can tell you, does anybody live in Prescott Valley? Does anybody live in Prescott Valley? Yes, we have a few, thank you. All right, so in 1999, there were no new groundwater allocations from that point forward. But the planned community of Granville, they received their allocation prior to that date. Now we're seeing the Jasper going in right now. There's a lot of house rooftops going up. But it's not new growth, it's deferred growth at Granville. Now as far as Jasper, they're working on getting their credits on that. All right, but the realization is that these allocations are their property right, and we can't take that away. State law does protect our groundwater supplies from new growth because growth does not receive new groundwater allocations. And we do need the alternative solutions, and I believe the Big Chino importation project is part of that. And as far as the actual legislative ideas, NAMWA is supporting continuation of the groundwater management plans beyond 2025. And I can tell you, having worked in state government, it is very customary for us to have plans of that nature. We have a planning horizon. And taking that beyond 2025, it would help us to work towards the safe yield. For instance, that plan led to groundwater mining in 1999, so there's more weight holding our feet to the fire by removing that sunset.
Thanks, Jody. So we have 4 minutes for reactions and comments on other people's statements. Anyone want to speak? No? Okay. Ed, it's up.
Yeah, I kind of rushed my comment on desalinization, so I just want to say I am concerned about, in engineering training, I never became an engineer, but also as a doctor, I see this a lot, where there's a mindset where people really want a very high-tech fix, and there's other people who really want a low-tech fix, more prevention. And if the high-tech works, it's really great, but you can't really count on it, even if it is being used well elsewhere, and simply because of the price. And we are looking, with a lot of, we're seeing this in the healthcare system right now, is we've got a great healthcare system, and it's really high-tech, and it makes it very unaffordable for people. And it's a real problem for society as a whole. And it's the same problem with desalinization. It's feasible, it could be done, but we've been talking about increasing our water bills 5 to 10-fold, and there will be people who can't afford it. And the question is, what would we do as a society, and do we really need to do that? And so I think I'm somebody who likes low-tech solutions. So I like conservation techniques. I like little things that people can do at home. I like systems that work to prevent a problem without having to spend a whole lot to fix it. And I think that's a better way to go right now, because it could help us also not with the problems way in the future, but with the water shortage we're having today.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Let's just move on to the next question. This one is about water for springs and rivers. So Arizona water law has failed to protect our flowing springs and rivers, such as the Verde River and the associated ecosystems. A coalition of environmental organizations proposed corrective legislation in 2018, but didn't even receive a committee hearing. Do you believe that this, that is protecting environmental water, do you believe that this is a role for state government? What ideas do you have for legislation to protect our remaining springs and rivers? What steps would you take to pass the bill? Who wants to go first? These are hard questions. I mean, these are difficult questions, and some of them don't really have definite answers. We're interested in thought patterns and philosophies here also. So, Noel, did I see your drop twitch? Okay, please go ahead.
This is when you commit hardy-carry, Yeah, of course. There is a role for the state to play. Of course there's a role. And that requires leadership. And that gets back to the governor of this state realizing the problem that we're going to face, especially in northern Arizona. And so I wish he would act sooner rather than later. And I wish he'd be bolder rather than dropping the issue, because we need to have a discussion about this, because we're dealing with the AMA, we're dealing with areas outside of the AMA where there is basically no regulation whatsoever, and anybody can use whatever they consider to be reasonable and prudent. And we don't even know what that is, because we don't meter any of this stuff. So we need to look at the whole system in one law that combines surface water and then subsurface water. And it's a giant task, because I wasn't around when they had the Arizona Groundwater Management Act, but I think that thing took like 3 years of going off with a group and studying the issue and coming up with what they did. But it's time to revisit that. And once again, I call on Governor Ducey to do that. Show leadership here, because I don't have the horsepower. Honestly, I don't. I'm not the committee chairman. I wish I was, but I'm not. And so if you get that kind of leadership, and that's where it's really at, it's calling for this, all good things will flow from it. And then we can start to at least analyze the problem and come up with some solutions, such as these exempt wells that we have. I think we have over 10,000 in the AMA. We don't know how much water they use. We know that we get no credit for any recharge, and there probably is very little recharge. And so how do we get a handle on that? I mean, these are critical issues that involve property rights, not easy issues. And I wish I had an answer, but I don't. But I know what leadership is, and we're not getting it right now. I wish we were.
Next comment? Joe.
Protecting the Verde River is a responsibility of the legislature, and clearly state laws have not been effective because 5 of our 6 rivers are either dried up or seriously harmed. Springs and rivers are private trusts and not private property. Therefore, it's the state's responsibility to manage these resources. Definitely, it is a duty of the state to manage wildlife and their habitats along the rivers. Our current legislature has done nothing about this. The most effective way to protect our rivers and springs is to manage groundwater level. Responses in downstream flows to changes in groundwater levels can have a very long lag time. For this reason, managed planning of aquifers must have long-term perspectives. The management of our groundwater resources must not only be viewed in years, but in decades, with the goal of continued sustainability. New legislature is needed to allow the state of Arizona to more effectively manage groundwater, recharge, and demands for the purpose of maintaining groundwater levels. And one more comment. Governor Ducey is not a strong leader, and he needs to be voted out. Thank you.
Okay, next, Karen.
First of all, I would like to get back to the subject of water and take the politics and the digs out of this, if we could, please. We have a lot of very intelligent people in this audience, and we're not here to politics. So let's get back to the question. And the question is do you believe there's a role for state government? It is a role of both state government and local government. We do have a lot of laws that are already in place, and we have the ability for our local jurisdictions to be able to pass some of those laws as well. We can do this, but we do it as a team. This year we had a lot of what we were trying to get some water laws billed, and once again, the politics got involved. It was the R's, it was the D, it was the ninth floor, it was the House, it was the Senate. It was a difference between do we let ADWR and the bureaucracy take over more management, or do we, how much does CWAG have involved, how much does SRP have involved? It was political, but remember when we did the Groundwater Act in 1980, you guys, it took years. I think it took like 10 years to get that thing together. So these things aren't done overnight. But we can certainly be here on a local level, and one of those local things is doing, as I said, about the macro and micro water harvesting. When we talk about, well, we had a subdivision going on in Chino when the growth was going on when I was mayor. Normally we get 4 houses to the acre foot. We were able to actually get 5 houses to the acre foot by allowing that subdivision, that subdivider and the developer to say, look, if you will, we incentivized him. We said, if you will do X, Y, and Z with your outdoor usage, we will be able to get you 5 houses to the acre foot. So it made it more affordable housing. We were able to make our precious water go further. And it was just, and that's just one example of the great things we can do, but we have to work together as a team and knock off the politics.
Jody.
Thank you. I agree with Senator Fan. It is local and it's state. I can tell you there's others who have interest. SRP also sees the Verde as an interest of theirs too. One of the biggest things that as I'm learning more about water, and I'm certainly not an expert in water, but I'm teachable. And, you know, apparently the general adjudication of the Gila River system, do you know how many years that that's been going on? Anybody can guess? Yeah, I was told 42 years.
It's since
And-
1974.
Thank you. And we still don't have it resolved. So it's authorized in legislation, and it's managed by the judicial branch. But I think that this is going to be something important because it's all this interlocutory, and as it was explained, everything floats down, goes together, and then fighting over it and not getting resolved, that's a problem. So when it comes to legislation, we really do need to have it resolved, but I'm willing to work on that. I like water, it's natural for me. Certainly, as we go on to what steps would you take, then approving that groundwater management, taking that sunset out would be something I would look at. But I do want to ask the question, you know, why rely on maybe folks in Phoenix to deal with a local issue? I've seen this before in other legislation where sometimes folks who are not from our area don't really have the feel and the culture of what is important to us. So I'm concerned about somebody else making those decisions. I think we really do need to have our voices there. I'm willing to be one of those voices because there's no one cookie cutter for everything.
David, you waved your drop. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I would have been just as happy not to have this question, but it's a very complicated question. And you know, I'm not a water expert. I don't think actually anybody up here is a water expert. I can't speak to every stream and spring in the state, but I did have the opportunity to participate in a couple of water conferences that were held by the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. That would be a guy named Rusty Bowers, sort of an expert on water issue and an environmentalist and a conservationist. So I attended the water conference in Safford and also in the Verde Valley just a month or two ago. And we had a lot of testimony from people who have lived up there for a long time, including people involved in the agricultural business, people running wineries, people running cattle, and people lived in Arizona a long, long time. And the testimony was that the Verde River is stable. Verde River is stable right now. It's not drying up right now. There is no water crisis right now on the Verde River. I have to say I do agree with our Senator Karen Fann. I think that water issues should be as local as possible. I am a little skeptical of governmental solutions to everything. I think there are vested economic interests and property interests that are involved in the vitality of the Verde River, and I think that provides probably a better layer of protection than government bureaucrats and enforcers trying to meter water. Am I done, or do I have 30 seconds? In Safford and Verde Valley both, there were a lot of just everyday citizens like yourself showing up. Maybe some of you were actually there. But there was a very, very broad and consistent message that people do not want metering. They do not want regulation. People who own water rights, they are the most conservative users of water that we could possibly have. It's their water. They have a vested interest, and I think that's how we protect the Verde River and our water supplies. Thank you.
Ed, go ahead.
This is a state issue, and I agree with Mr. Campbell on this, that the Groundwater Management Act needs to be fixed. Right now, it doesn't protect rivers and streams. So Governor Rose Mofford declared that in-stream flow is beneficial and it should be protected by Department of Water Resources. Congress has declared the Verde River a wild and scenic river, and absolutely protected. But our state law doesn't recognize that groundwater has anything to do with flowing water in streams. So there's nothing that you can do under the state law to control people taking the groundwater out that is feeding the Verde River. So yes, it's stable right now, but it won't be if we keep pumping from the Big Chino. And so that needs to be amended. And yeah, it's really hard politically to do this. I'm going to say you need to get people concerned. Environmental groups are concerned, hunting and fishing groups are concerned, the tourist industry should be concerned. Tourism's a $23 billion industry, that's a quarter of all retail sales. They generate tax revenue that's a quarter of our state budget. They're a big deal. And people come to Arizona for the Grand Canyon and golf. Those are all built around water. People love our rivers and streams. So we need to get people, we need to get the people who are concerned. I'm going to say something a little odd, that there's this book out there called The Water Knife, which it's a work of fiction, and it's not really great fiction. I don't really suggest reading it. But the guy did amazing research on what Arizona's future would be like with a growing severe water shortage. And just for that part of it, I'd love to see a movie made out of that so people could really see what we're looking at. And I think that would get enough people up in arms that the governor and the recalcitrant people in the state legislature would take action on this. And we could fix the Groundwater Management Act so that we can protect our rivers. Because right now, it doesn't allow the protections that we're talking about.
Okay, Jan?
I agree that I think that it is a responsibility of both the state and local governments to be able to address this issue. I would look at Arizona's political and community leaders finding means to manage water resources more collaboratively, to craft innovative and integrated solutions across economic, social, and ecosystem needs. In our region, this might be the Prescott AMA Safe Field Plan, but we really need to look at longer-term goals to address the water scarcity. We need to look at climate patterns, augmentation of water supplies, and measures to protect the Verde River. I would also want to see obsolete water laws be modernized to allow conjunctive management of groundwater and surface water. The Safe Field goal must address existing gaps such as surface water impacts and the increased protection of aquifers outside of AMA boundaries. Also, aquifer replenishment must be expanded with hydrological, sound, artificial recharge, and recovery locations to better balance aquifer storage. I also believe the policies and ordinances must be authorized to enhance irrigation efficiencies and water conservation, including rainwater harvesting, and to promote the use of effluent and other reclaimed supplies through advanced technology. I think it's important for local and regional water management strategies to be better coordinated. I think that's a big thing. Evaluated, broadened, and adapted. Business, environment, and regulatory communities must work together in concert. Coordinate and evaluate, broaden, and adapt local and regional water management strategies, and form a nexus of business, environment, and regulatory committees to work together.
Great. So I've got, I have two microphones and neither one works. So I'll just shout then. So we have time for a couple of responses and comments. Does anyone want to jump in and respond to something that's been said? Karen.
Thank you, Gary. I'll add something else because we talked about what was going on like at the legislative body and everything else. But another thing that we all have in common here in this room is that we live in rural Arizona, and you have to be very, very aware that there are very big separate issues and different voices that are being heard or not being heard, the difference between rural and urban. So you go down to Phoenix or Tucson, and the population they have down there, anybody get on a plane and you fly over and you see the thousands and thousands of swimming pools and fountains that are flowing in 120-degree heat. You know what? This is a statewide issue. Remember, a lot of SRPCAP water is coming from the Verde River. It is coming from all of our rivers and the streams that we have. So this really is something that we have to have a serious conversation about, and those of us in rural Arizona, our voices need to be a little louder, folks, because they are constantly telling us to monitor our wells, to do this, to do that, and everything else. But for some reason, it's okay for them just to keep spinning the water and using the water as they see fit, without thinking about as much conservation as we think about in northern and rural Arizona.
Okay, Ed, 1 minute for this,
Okay.
and then on to the next
Yeah, I just want to second what Karen Pham just said about Maricopa County, which has 2/3 of the population here. And they are on the verge of losing CAP water. Not all of it, but some of it, as Lake Mead drops below a certain level. And we know what happens in other states where the huge population centers out of water. If they find it in other places, they take it. And so we should be very concerned that Maricopa County doesn't have a water shortage, because they will begin looking at our water and as much as they can. And we do need to, the amount of water wasted in this state is pretty remarkable. So we have a lot of room to conserve. And so we do have to work on that.
So I'm going to borrow Karen's mind. Great, so on to the next question. This is about water districts, which is a local solution to local problems kind of thing. That's what you were just talking about. So here's the question. Currently, groundwater in the Big Chino Valley is unregulated. There are 4 future threats to the Big Chino groundwater. 1, the Big Chino Valley Pump Storage Project. 2, the Big Chino Pipeline Project. 3, growth and development in the Big Chino Valley. And 4, expanded agricultural irrigation. Unless these threats are addressed, the Upper Verde River and some Paulden wells will dry up. A regulatory district with the authority to manage groundwater in the Big Chino Valley could protect domestic wells in the base flow of the Verde River. Is this a good idea? Why or why not? You have a plan. So, who wants to take that first? Ed, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take the easy ones, okay? Is this okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is a very big issue, and we just need to look up at the Kingman area. What's happened there is that these almond growers from California, Saudi princes have come in, bought up land in Mojave, Yuma, and Cochise counties. They pump out the water to irrigate their crops and take them back home, and they're taking advantage of our really loose regulations. And Kingman could actually lose its water supply, and they're talking about that possibly within as little as 30 years. And so they tried to fight back, and they asked the state to declare their area a non-irrigation area. And what the Department of Water Resources says is we have no authority to do that. And so we face the same problem here. Big Chino, anybody can stick their straw in there, and are we going to be able to say anything about that? So we need to protect the domestic wells. We need to protect the base flow of the Verde River. The best way is with the active management area, if we really enforce that. But even an irrigation non-expansion area in the Big Chino would be helpful, because it would stop the biggest short-term problem, which is foreign countries and these huge growers from California who come in and pump the aquifers dry. And once these guys come in and they get established, they're grandfathered in. And there's nothing that you can do after that. So we really need to act as quickly as possible. But again, the lesson from Kingman is that we have to change the Groundwater Management Act if we want to be able to protect the Big Chino. And unfortunately what we're seeing is, recently there were a couple legislators from southern Arizona, not from up here, who actually wanted to weaken it so that they could ignore some of the provisions that were provided. And, and that's kind of the mood of some of the people in the legislature. And that is not the direction that we want to go.
Great. Who would like to speak next? Karen, please.
Everybody's still formulating their thoughts on that.
These are hard questions.
They are.
They're worth
sure
thinking
are.
about.
And I'll tell you, if you guys don't know, we have some of the most amazing water engineers in this room right here that know more in their little tiny fingers than all of us combined up here. So we feel a little silly talking about water when they're the experts here. But so let's talk about regulation district and what we can possibly do. Again, let's go back to empowering our local jurisdictions and empowering us and ourselves to handle some of these problems. Let me give you a couple of ideas. I worked with the city of Prescott, served on that council, and I was the mayor of Chino Valley, so I was intricately involved with the negotiations on the pipelines, when the city of Prescott bought the Willow and Watson Lakes from the CDID. So we have been doing a lot of stuff over the last quarter of a century to be able to manage more of our water here. And like I said, Watson and Willow were two of the prime examples on that. There was another really good thing that we've been working on with Mark Holmes and some of the others, is if you may not know, but Chino Valley, the northern part of limits, is actually in the Big Chino Aquifer. So the town of Chino Valley actually is in the Little and the Big Chino Aquifer. Mark Holmes came up with this brilliant idea that Herb Gunther absolutely loves, is the possibility of actually, if we import some water from the Big Chino into the Little Chino, we can use it, we can recharge it. Most of our wastewater treatment plants are getting like 98% recharge right now, and we can literally pump it right back into the Big Chino. Think about that, literally a recycling program between two aquifers. So there are some really, really, really amazing things out there that need to be pursued that we can possibly look at, which will make our water go a lot further. Thanks.
Okay, next comment. Jody, please.
I think we were talking about the question of being whether a regulatory district with the authority to manage the groundwater was a good idea. And I know Representative Campbell, he did talk about that. Thank you. He talked about that earlier, that we did try to do that. There was the Development Commission convened for all the folks with the water interests, and that for a couple of years even, and that committee had negotiated a proposal for the legislature, but it just didn't make it out of committee. So as Senator Fan says, at the local level, certainly let's take a look at that. And here's one thing to consider as well. We could purchase development rights and conservation development. It's voluntary. Certainly we could pull our dollars and convince ranchers to pay for the development rights. It's like 25 acres of land out in Dewey on the Agua Fria. The family there owned the property, and they set it aside so that it wouldn't get developed on. There was a tax benefit for them. Another is, we know that the Big Chino up in the Paulding area, it will explode with growth. And so certainly we want to take the long view on that. We have a vested interest in protecting the water long term. The Verde is better protected by having some significant vested interests in that groundwater. So that's another way that we could do that. Also, at the local level, let's work with our ranchers and ranch managers to manage the watershed health. And this would be like the grassland restoration. We talked about this earlier, which reduces the woody biomass, better promote charge and bioresiliency, better wildlife habitat, and more forage for the grazing. Also, we can take a look at maybe visit with our county officials there and in managing that, because we do have the issue of the exempt wells, and that is going out. So reaching safe yield within the AMA that's our long-term supply. It gives us drought resiliency. The most significant thing we can do for the Big Chino water plants is we have an agreement with SRP not to harm the Verde.
Good, next comment. Noel, did you twitch your drop? Okay, please go ahead.
I'm very concerned about this storage pumping plant. It's 27,000 acre feet they want to pull out of Big Chino. And the only way, it's an economically, it makes sense. I mean, if you've looked at what they want to do, to use excess electricity that's generated during the daytime to pump the water up to the reservoir, that all makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is where they get the initial draw, 27,000 acre feet, and where do they get the water to resupply for evaporation? That's the real issue. And my feeling is if they were to could buy up 27,000 acre feet of existing water rights for ranchers, that would be a not a net loss to the aquifer. The existing water that's being used would stop being used and it would go into the plant. But I doubt that's going to happen. They don't want to pay for that land, those water rights. They'd rather put the straw in the ground and take out 27,000 acre feet. And that's going to be a huge issue, and I know you're going to all stay on top of that, because I am. Secondly, I would support a regulatory district. I'm not sure how that could be set up, but the state would have to be involved. I mean, but it makes sense, to look at this thing in a comprehensive way, because the AMA, it just doesn't cover enough of the area to really make that impact. And I'd look at every issue brought forth that would tend to make our water supply assured. I really would. We need to have that. And that's where I am on that issue.
Okay, Mr. Stringer.
Thank you. The question says there are 4 future threats to the Big Chino groundwater. Then it goes on to list the 4, and I'd like to address those things because I think the question assumes something that is really still in dispute or at least unknown scientifically. And let me start with talking about this pump storage facility. I don't think we should rule it out. I think there's some real important questions that need to be answered, but I don't think we should just reflexively rule it out. 27,000 acre-feet is a lot of water, but we've been pumping the Big Chino. There have been agricultural interests pumping the Big Chino going back many, many decades, pumping very large amounts of water. The idea is to fill this pump storage facility, I think, over 2 years, so it's a substantial drawdown, but it's over 2 years. But the bottom line is that we're not going to do it unless the science is there, unless that we can know for reasonable certainty that it's not going to impact the water table. So I think we should allow these people to keep looking at this. I think we need to do more research on this, but I don't think we should just reflexively rule it out. I also want to talk about the pipeline. I think I'm running out of time here, but a pipeline from the Big Chino, we already have a clear understanding that we're not going to pump water out of the Big Chino if it is going to diminish or degrade the Verde River. So that pipeline is not going to be built until the science is there to support it. So I'm not sort of reflexively going to rule something like that out. I think that we can pump from the Big Chino. We've been pumping from the Big Chino for a long, long time for agricultural interest. The question is, how much can we pump from the Big Chino without impacting the Verde River? It's not a gallon for gallon ratio. If you take a gallon out of the Big Chino, then you lose a gallon out of the Verde River. The aquifer simply doesn't work that way. I think we have to await the science.
Okay, thanks, David. By the way, CWAG has an information bulletin on the Big Chino pump storage proposal back on the literature table that you might want to look at. And on our website, we have our position on the Big Chino pipeline project also. So, and that's probably also at the back table. So if you're interested in those topics, grab those info sheets on your way out. Next commenter, please. Jan.
On this question, I think the real question is, are our existing officials doing a good job of trying to go ahead and come up with the safe goal, safe yield by 2025, which is basically a balance between water withdrawal and water recharge to the aquifers. And so far, we haven't been able to come up to any conclusions. I found an article that talked a little bit about what the state of Nebraska is doing. They have 23 separate water districts that are separate from the state government itself. They have delegated an unusual amount of groundwater management authority to locally elected district boards. These boards have taxing authority and are organized by river basin, not political boundaries. There is a greater vested interest in managing the resources they feel if your neighbor is affected if you are using too much water. They were fairly successful, but not completely successful, because they really felt that the caliber of people who are elected to serve on the Water District Board are what is going to make or break this approach. One of the risks and one of the main resources a water district has not been seriously proposed for our region is the success or failure of such a district, and that would be a concern. But although there's no guarantee that a regional water district would do a better job of securing our water futures than stakeholders company, the communities, the Citizens Water Advocacy Group of CWAG believes the concept deserves a thorough investigation and look at possibly local control at that level.
Okay, thank you, Jan. And finally, we have Joe. You're up.
Thank you. In unregulated Big Chino Valley, property owners can pump as much groundwater as they want, as long as it's for one of the defined beneficial uses. Hydrology indicates that protecting the base flow of the Verde River will also protect the Paulden wells. regulation is needed in the Big Chino Valley. In fact, the 4 future threats that are mentioned in this question to the Big Chino groundwater could result in drying the Upper Verde River and the Paulden Wells. Regulation of groundwater in Big Chino Valley, as I said, is necessary. But to answer this question, a new regulatory district is not the best idea. In my opinion, overlapping regulatory agencies will complicate planning, management, and enforcement functions. Instead, we need to improve the water laws. We need to better fund ADWR and allow ADWR to more effectively manage the protection of our local groundwater supplies and perennial streams. I would like to see a local office of the ADWR here in northern Arizona. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. At this point, we go to the wild card questions from the audience. And so, everybody be on your toes here. And this question is directed to Representative Stringer and others. So, but you can all comment on that. It's just, I'm going to ask Dave to go first. Wells are going dry in Chino Valley. And that's true on the west side in section 33. It's true. Do you consider that a crisis? Why or why not?
Well, anytime you lose water, obviously it's a crisis, so I think I would have to agree with that. I think, as I understand it, that the wells that are going dry are sort of on the edge of the aquifer, and the aquifer is going down about a foot a year. So that is a very serious concern. I don't know the actual number of wells that have gone down. I don't know that that's been reported, or if it's been reported, I haven't seen it. But of course, when somebody loses water, that's a big problem. Now, I think in many cases, when a well goes dry, they can drill deeper into the aquifer and recover their water. But there may be instances where that's simply not practical, and then they have to import water. And so, of course, it's a concern. Anytime your aquifer is going down. But what is the solution or the alternative to that? Do we simply stop pumping water out of the out of the Little Chino? I think the people who bought on the edge of the aquifer, presumably they did their due diligence and they knew that their water situation was a little more tenuous than people who were located a mile or two away. So obviously it's a concern, but I don't think we can simply stop pumping water or that we can resort to some kind of drastic conservation measures that impact a lot of other people in very onerous ways because a few people have lost water. And that doesn't mean I'm not sympathetic to their situation, but I think the remedy for that might be so far-reaching that it is simply politically impossible. It's a very serious concern. I wish I had a better answer for that. Maybe some people are going to have to import water or drill deeper. I don't know.
Well, we all wish we had better answers to that one. Karen, you wanted to comment, please?
I did. I just wanted to add on to what Representative Stringer said, is that in Chino Valley, obviously we do have a problem on the west side. That Table Mountain area has always been a difficult place to drill well for, and to be able to keep that water pumping. So that has been something that's been historic prior to even, Chino Valley incorporating. So that is a bad area. But what we do need to keep watching is, and many of you may not be aware, but smack dab in the middle of Chino Valley, right there on Highway 89, City of Prescott has 7 wells, 7 municipal wells, that is pumping water out of the Chino Valley area down to Prescott. So that has always been a real concern of ours. Obviously, we want to make sure that everybody in the region has proper water, but being a mayor of Chino Valley, that's something our residents have always worried about, to make sure that there isn't over pumping where we create a cone of depression, which actually is going to have effect on every well in the Chino Valley area. So again, regional cooperation, we all rely on each other for those water resources.
Okay, Ed, head is up, and then Jody. Thanks. So, by the way, every one of you doesn't have to comment on these audience questions if you don't wish to, but you have the ability to.
I'd like to. So wells are growing dry, and is that a crisis? And yes, it's the beginning of one. I mean, it's a canary in a coal mine. We know that wells are not going dry just in Chino Valley. It's happening all over the state, and it's always due to pumping the groundwater out. We need safe yield. Lost my notes. We need safe yield in the local AMA because that's part of this aquifer, and the alternative, is not to stop pumping. The alternative is conservation. I just want to say conservation is not really drastic. As Karen Fan pointed out, half of our residential water goes to watering lawns. If we had a program to offer people money to change to desert landscaping, that's not really drastic. That's a pretty simple thing to do, and it could ameliorate a whole lot of this. We need to look at the ways that we can stop pumping out more water than, how do I say this? We need to use less water, and there are easy ways to do that. Conservation is actually a fairly simple thing. Payson uses far less water than we use, and we can do that.
So, you were next, Jody? Thanks.
Thank you. I was told I have to bite the mic. So and it is true, we have other areas, as Ed mentioned. When I was down in New River recently, I was hearing about people that they don't have water there. They actually were sold homes without water. And so, imagine turning on the spigot, no water comes out, and you have to bring that in. That's a tough one. And as Chino Valley goes, I appreciate Senator Fan sharing, and I'm sure that as we look further out and head toward the Paulden area, there's a concern there because of the potential of growth. The actual district, for those of you who would care to know, goes all the way up to I-40, and then on the south it goes down into Anthem, Cape Creek Carefree area. To the west, it's the Baghdad-Yarnell area, and to the east almost to the Verde. So certainly, as you can see, the Prescott urbanized area, that's one of the epicenters for population. So when it comes to the growth that would be headed up toward Paulden, and the concern is having more dry wells. We don't want that. So as I had mentioned, working potentially with our county officials so that when development goes in, it doesn't make as big as an impact. So let me give you an example. If a developer comes in and buys, say, 10,000 acres, arbitrary number, there's 2 acres zoning. So with that, if you put the 5,000 homes on a smaller concentration, yes, there are wells there, but because of doing that together, then you could go in and put in the actual recharge system. Of that, you can reclaim 65% of your water back. So there's some smart ways to be able to do that because nobody wants to run out of water.
Jan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, I was talking with a friend yesterday, and she mentioned that she's from Ohio, and she remembers in the early days when she was a child that in her family farm they had these huge cisterns that went ahead and collected rainwater so that it would go water their crops and so forth. And so what is I don't see that as a major drastic issue in looking at conservation of water, rainwater. With these monsoons over the past couple of weeks, I just watched sheets of water coming down off my roof, and there's nothing I can do with it. It just goes down into a little stream, and that's that. And so maybe we should not be so anti-conservative in looking at some of these solutions itself. I think that Jody brought up a really great idea about, or brought a thought to mind also, is as we are looking at further development for rainwater harvesting and that kind of thing, is build that into new construction. And we also talk about this with solar, is why not go ahead and build solar into new construction to go ahead and move away from oil and gas and well, just better electricity and so forth, and build the capabilities within new homes to be able to collect water, to be able to recharge, reuse water, and so forth. Well, I guess that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Noel and then Joe.
You know, one of the best ways to conserve is the rate structure for water. I wholeheartedly support a tiered rate structure, and you know, giving every home a certain number of gallons of water, and then as the usage goes up, you pay more for it. That's really how you change behavior. I mean, how many times have you driven around the city of Prescott in the summertime? I have a lot, seeing these sprinklers going off. And it's against our ordinance. They're not water smart, and we don't punish them, but we just let it happen. But it shouldn't happen. And the way it'll stop is if they have to pay more, because everybody's pretty conscious about their water rates. So let's do that. And as to safe yield, we're never going to get to safe yield when you have over 10,000 exempted wells in the AMA. It's not going to happen because, one, we don't know how much water they use. It's probably not a lot, but they're not metered. We don't know. And secondly, all the water that goes into septic does not go into recharge. So for years, for 10 years, I've talked about this, and I'm going to throw it out again. We need a long-term plan with the county to allow people on these wells to install a retaining tank of maybe 5,000, 10,000 gallons, and that all their effluent and black water would go into this tank, and then maybe once every a month, the tank would be pumped out and taken to our recharge facilities. That way we would get credit for that. And sure, it's a matter of money. It's also, if you did it over a 30-year period, the financing, it might be doable. And I don't know why anybody doesn't look at that. But you're never going to give a safe yield when you have these wells being used and going back into septic tanks. That's got to be looked at, because 10,000 will soon be 13,000.
Joe, please go ahead.
Could you repeat the question, please?
The question is that wells are going dry in Chino Valley. Do you consider that a crisis? Why or why not?
Well, yes, I consider it a crisis, and I think that goes back to our situation that we're not managing our groundwater well. We need regulation. We need new, stronger laws in the state of Arizona. We need strong leadership to get those things. Yes, it's definitely a crisis, especially for that person that doesn't have water in the well anymore, or anyone else that's experiencing that. Thank you.
Okay, here's another audience question, and I'm going to have to kind of rewrite this a little bit as I go, so give me a chance. How much regulation would be acceptable with new state legislation that would address water issues? What is the balance between the right of private property owners to use, but not own, water, and the need for more sensible water management? The question is trying to get at the balance, your idea of the best balance between regulation and personal usage rights. No, go ahead.
We need to incentivize people to use less water. And how do you incentivize? Well, you make the cost more expensive. I just talked about that on a tiered structure. That's a very powerful incentive, okay? And as far as the outlying areas outside the AMA, we need to have a public education process where these people that are spraying in the daytime, stop it, do it at night, and save a lot of water. In other words, I don't think that we don't know how much water they're using, but when you spray these huge areas in the daytime, well, you know that they know that water is just being evaporated. We have to incentivize them to do better. We can appeal to their altruistic feelings about the land and the water. Farmers and ranchers are good people, and they want to do the right thing. Really, they do. But they're very independent. They want to protect their rights, and they have rights. And so we have to reach a balance with them, and that's what we talk all the time about this. I talk to the cattlemen. I'll talk to farming interests out there. And you know, you can only push these guys so far, and they get their hackles up, rightly so. And so you have to come to a incentive as opposed to a stick. Let's use the carrot some way to make this thing more practicable and more accessible. And that's what I'll try to do when I'm down there. Thank you.
Who else? Jody, go ahead.
Thank you. You know, here in Arizona, we're not about overregulation. I can tell you that I've worked at every level of government, and specifically working with federal process, lots of overreach. And there are times when you need it, and there are times when you don't. I think if someone is proposing this, we would need to be really careful here in Arizona. I do believe balance is important. And I agree with Noel about the tiered approach. I can tell you, in Prescott Valley, we do have a tiered water rate program, and it's really good. and people are able to choose it for their lifestyle. They pay a premium if they want more water, and it's just economic. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? On to the next audience question. So this person writes that I moved to Albuquerque in 1981. Everybody bragged about the unlimited water in the aquifer under the city. With unlimited building and an 8-year drought, the aquifer dried up. They had a plan B. What is your plan B when our aquifer dries up due to unlimited building and being in drought for 20 years? What do you do? Do you take proactive measures to prevent that from happening, or do you address the problem somehow after it happens? How would you address it? I mean, people are concerned about their continuing access to water. So how do you address that? So who goes first? Joe, I think you waved first. We'll get everyone. We have time.
That question is a question that is real because we are depleting our water supplies. But to get to that point where it's completely dry, there's no filling aquifers really at that point, but we do proactive work. We're going to do what we can do now. That's why the changes need to happen now and not pretend that the aquifer can't dry up and that we'll never have a water problem. That as I'm drinking my water from my blue water bottle, I'm thinking how appreciative I am that we have water that's available. We turn on our spigot and there's water there. So it's got to be proactive. We have to start now with our stronger laws so we manage our groundwater and we don't pretend that there's an aquifer under our aquifer or any such nonsense. We've got to be science-based in our water commitments and our water laws. Thanks.
Okay, I lost track of who was first, but we have time for everybody. So Jan and then David.
We are currently monitoring our aquifers and the amount of water that we have in them. And so as we move forward, we should be in a situation where things start to get very low. We should have already been aware of that and taking alternative measures in either forest conservation or something of that sort. So to say that we are going to go into a situation where there is no water in the aquifer, we should have been proactive before then. Thank you.
David, please.
Thank you. I think the question illustrates the level of fear and misunderstanding that is in certain elements of the community. Let me just say straight out, there is never, ever going to be a time when our aquifer dries up completely. That's simply not going to happen. We know that our aquifer is going down. We're using too much water. We're using more water than we are putting back in. We know that. But it's going down right now about a foot a year. That could accelerate. But we have several hundred feet of the aquifer. There's a lot of water down there, okay? We have other options. Right now, we are recharging. The city of Prescott Valley, I believe, is recharging about 65% of their water, okay? We have common sense conservation measures that we can adopt. As Jody said, we are monitoring. So we are never going to get up in the morning and open the spigot and it's dry, because there is water to last for a long, long time. And we've talked today about some of the things that can be done long term in terms of conservation, the desalination issue, which I think is a long-term permanent solution. It may be a way off, but eventually we are going to have desalination. So there's never going to be a time when we absolutely run out of water. We are using less water today than we were 50 years ago. So this fear-mongering that our aquifer is going to go dry and we're not going to have water simply does not make sense.
No, please comment.
You know, nothing focuses the mind like a crisis. I mean, when you have a crisis, the legislature gets very focused and serious. For example, Red for Ed. I mean, there was no talk about a 20% pay increase until those, and listen, You know, I was in that, so I know what focused pressure can do and crisis can do. Okay, so what I think is going to happen is in the Kingman area, where they really are going to face a serious crisis, when that happens, then everybody's going to get religion. And until that happens, until we have a crisis, we're just going to keep on plutzing along and doing little things around the edges that we can do, and development will occur, and growth will happen. But at some point, you got to pay the piper. And so, having been in the legislature 4 years and seeing how that body operates, and I'm telling you, any one of you could be up there in our place. We're not geniuses up there. We're just average Joes trying to deal with complex issues. But it's such an important issue in this state. It is the premier issue in Arizona is water. You know, and you know the old adage, and I'm not going to repeat it, but it's precious. And so everybody, we all agree we need to be proactive, but politics is not proactive, it's reactive, and I'm sorry to say that. And that's why I keep saying, calling on our governor to step forward and lead us in this area, and don't wait till we have a crisis, and then we go crazy trying to fix it.
More comments? Go ahead, Ed.
You know, I want to say that this is actually a very real fear. Right now there are plans for a lot of straws in this aquifer, and it can be drained. You know, a lot of societies have thought that their natural resources would last forever, and have learned the hard way that they can't. And what's happening in Kingman is a good example. It's happening in other places in the state. To say it won't happen here is simply, it's just not reality. Yes, there's recharge going on. Recharge water is not going to make it down there for 100 years. You know, Kingman thought they had unlimited water. You know, now they're running out. And it really does remind me of, you know, my addicted patients who just short-term thinking, and they just make them, you know, more desperate, more hungover from a short-term plan. We don't really have a good plan B. I mean, what we're going to end up with, if we don't conserve water, is we will become a society with water haves and water have-nots, and that is not a good place to be. And one of the things I think we need to do is also recognize that the added pressure comes from climate change, which is threatening Phoenix's water supply, and also decreases the amount of water that we get up here. And we have to, you know, as a state, we need to take that really seriously, because again, it's another part of the prevention plan that we have to do.
Thanks, Gary. I want to go back to a familiar theme here is Plan B is too late. If we have to start thinking about a Plan B, it is too late. So let's go back to what we talked about, regional cooperation. Remember the Little Chino Aquifer, that encompasses Chino Valley, Prescott Valley, some of Dewey-Humboldt, and a lot of the unincorporated area. Think of the Little Chino as like a bowl of water. We're all in that bowl of water, and we're all drinking out of that bowl of water. And just because it is Prescott or Chino Valley or Prescott Valley doesn't mean that we're not all still drinking out of that same bowl of water. So we need to do better as local jurisdictions to be able to work stronger. When we talk about the pipeline project, only Prescott and Prescott Valley are part of that. Yet the water and the pipes are coming straight through Chino Valley. I mentioned earlier about how the northern town limits of Chino Valley is in the Big Chino Aquifer. We could use that to our advantage. In Chino Valley, we have 5 water services, 5 privately owned water distribution services. Appaloosa Meadows, Chino Meadows, and guess what? The city of Prescott also has a water distribution service in Chino Valley. And we're trying very, very hard to work with Prescott to be able to purchase that system so that we can expand it in Chino and get more of the people up there off of the wells. We can do more with the county. I know the county, we've had this luxury of being able to say county's not going to get involved with water services. We're getting to the point of where our municipalities are growing out into our counties, and we need to be able to start working together to figure out if we need to build dry lot subdivisions, if we need to be able to expand those water services more. That's what we need to do.
Okay, that is all the time we have for questions. Now I'd like the audience to hear the candidates' closing statements. So let's work this direction down the table this time. And so Karen, could you go first? 1 minute, please.
Okay, dear. Thank you all very much for having us today. Always great to see you guys, and we all learn something new every day. I appreciate all the support that you've given me in the past. I am running for my second term as the Senate, and I hope to be able to continue not only all of the things I fight for with water, but for rural Arizona as well as our transportation issues. You know me, I'm also a money numbers guy, so it's important to me to make sure that we have the monies available, that we can pay for the things that we're supposed to be doing in the state of Arizona. And those things would be things like transportation, secure water, safe borders, as well as all the other education, all of the basic things that government is supposed to be doing. So I'm hoping that you will vote for me and send me back to the Senate so I can continue representing you on all of these issues that are so important to us in LD1. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Joe?
Well, my name is Joe Craycraft, and I'm running for Arizona State Senate. I want to thank CWAG for putting on this water forum. And it was mentioned that someone felt silly talking about water. And I'll tell you, I'm honored to talk about water. I was honored to be included in this so I could learn about water and get to know what our problems are here. Our primary water problem is the basic hydrology principles that are showing that we're pumping 2 times more water than we're recharging. The impact of this overdraft includes declining water levels in the aquifers and drying up wells. Action needs to be taken now. It needs to be strong. It needs to be effective. As your next state senator, I will work collaboratively with experts, and together we will bring innovative solutions to proactively work and protect Arizona's water. Thank you. One last thing. Save the Dells.
Thanks, Joe. David, your closing statement. 1 minute.
Joe, we finally found something to agree on. I agree, save the Dells, absolutely. Let me just conclude with a plug for market-based solutions. I'm skeptical of government solutions. The best solutions are locally based and do not require a bureaucracy to enforce them. One of the simplest ways to control consumption is simply to rely on the market. And I think Noel touched on this. If water costs more, people will conserve on their own. We don't need government inspectors peeking into people's backyards to see if they are using drought-resistant plants. The people who water those plants will figure that out for themselves based on what they pay for their water. If rainwater harvesting lowers water bills, people will adopt this on their own. They don't need a government regulation or a government bureaucracy to make them do that. So I don't like coercion. Government is based on coercion. I prefer freedom. I'm an advocate of freedom. And whenever we can have voluntarism, including conservation and market-based solutions, I support that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Ed, your closing statement.
Yeah, Ed Gogek again. I think the big problem we're facing here is the question of short-term thinking, which is very common, versus planning decades ahead. Because right now we are on track to deplete our water supply, our local water supply, and then to tap into the big Chino along with the farmers from California and Saudi Arabia, and eventually deplete that. And in the process turn the Verde River into a dry ditch. And then end up right back where we are right now, which is what are we going to do about our water? Except then we'll have doubled in size and have homes that aren't really prepared to conserve. So the best way to deal with our water shortage is also the cheapest. Acknowledge that we live in a desert with limited amount of water and learn how to live within our means, which is very, very doable. Conservation is always the cheapest solution. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we need to conserve, we need to reuse, we need to recycle, and that means getting people together and fairly regulating. I personally believe that government in a democracy is us. It's not some outside agency. And so we can get together and use that to sensibly regulate what we're doing, to use a lot of. I like the idea of using a lot of carrots, but I know that it's also important to have a stick in the background just in case. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Jan, your closing statement.
I I'm Jan Manolis, and thank you again for attending today's water forum, and thank you CWAG for hosting it. I look at preventative measures to ensure that we are not going to run out of water. I actually read a really excellent article in the New York Times about what's happening in southern Arizona with the alfalfa farms and so forth. And they never had a chance. Once the Saudis came in and started harvesting alfalfa, it just basically everyone's wells went dry. So we need to be proactive and looking at what we're doing with our our pumping water. We need to look at drought-tolerant landscaping, looking at harvesting residential and commercial rainwater, looking at reuse and recharge of treated wastewater, control groundwater exploration by land management. We need to look at stormwater management that supports aquifer recharge. And while I'm not a big person on regulation, we really need to look at groundwater pumping. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Julie?
I appreciate y'all engaging. Water is very important. What you'll find as you work with me is I listen. I know how to work with others at the local, the regional, the state level. Also, I'm a trusted public servant serving on council in Prescott Valley. I'm a woman of faith, and I'm pleased to be able to serve my Lord. Endorsements are important to me, and I can tell you I've been endorsed by many people because I am conservative. On the short list, that's former Senate President Steve Pierce, House Speaker Andy Tobin, Mayor Harvey Skoog, Mayor Pro Tem Billy Orr, County Attorney Sheila Polk, Sheriff Scott Masher, Superintendent Tim Carter, the Chamber of Commerce in Arizona, and our local here with our realtors. And I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thanks. Noel, your closing statement, please.
I was going to say something in kind, but I won't. I'll think about it. Listen, I want to tell you about the herd mentality. Yeah, that's one thing we talk about water. We're going to say water. You get down to the legislature, and the herd mentality takes over, and you got to go with the group. So you got to look at who votes on what bills. And then CWAG knows how I voted on some really critical bills. I voted against a bill that would have put straws in the San Pedro River to help a developer, and the county officials there and representatives wanted to stop the assured ability that was required before they could put in a development. And they wanted to get rid of that ordinance and go ahead and put a development in, and they would not have been able to offer the home buyers an assured supply of water. I voted against that. I was the only Republican that voted against that. And there's other bills that I voted against that protect our water resources. So it's one thing, yeah, okay, we all want to do the right thing, but when you get down there, you got to fight the crowd. You just can't go along to get along, and that's what they want you to do a lot of times down there. So hopefully, whoever gets elected will stand up for the right thing and do the right thing, and I hope that I can do that if I'm reelected. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. So this concludes the forum. The candidates could go ahead and go back to their tables and chat with citizens. That would be the next step. Thank you so much for coming.